To kick things off, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Jason Haig.
Okay, great. Hey, thanks for the introduction to ADL. Thanks, Liz. And thanks again for inviting us to talk about xAPI profiles. I'm going to be talking about the basics of profiles, a little bit of history, some current resources we have up till today as it stands. And Aaron's going to be talking about ADL's plans for this new profile server project and other resources to come. The name of the project is ALIAS. It stands for Advancing Learning Interoperability Across Systems. Okay, so let's get started. What is a profile? For those of you that like definitions, here's the official definition of a profile from ADL. It's the human or machine readable documentation of concepts, extensions, and statement templates when implementing xAPI in a particular context. So what exactly does ADL's definition mean when it says human readability and machine readability? A good analogy is the credit card. If you think about it, a credit card has human readable information on the front, such as your name, your credit card number, the expiration date, so forth. And on the back, there's the magnetic strip. Nowadays, it's also embedded in a microchip. There's additional machine understandable information associated with the microchip that only card readers can process. A profile is also considered the blueprint for successful xAPI implementation that can help you send better data for several reasons. Allows you to come up with a common vocabulary for describing the events and the activities you want to track. It helps you come up with descriptive metadata and determine what your data collection requirements are. It lets you figure out like which things you're going to report on and which things you're going to have analytics on. It also allows teams on a project to kind of work in different parts separately but concurrently. For example, when we were developing xAPI projects in the past at ADL and when I was involved in some of the different communities of practice, we were able to build content at the same time as the person building out the reporting dashboard tool without having to communicate much about the implementation at all. We just had to establish the profile and we're able to start working concurrently. So it can help serve as kind of the blueprint for your development. It's really the first step you should probably take. So profiles are all about sending better data in a more standardized templated approach. If you think about all the different types of interactions, activities, and performance that can be tracked out there across a multitude of devices, let's say games, courses, performance support, you have mobile apps, sensors, video, simulations, you name it. Profiles really provide a way for you to standardize on how all of that data for the different types of content can be tracked. It also will ultimately make it easier on reporting analytics, but it will help make your xAPI content more interoperable with other LRSs. So here's some existing profiles that you can take advantage of today. There's a video profile. I've spent several years working on that. It allows you to track any types of video interaction, really with any type of video player. It's supposed to be kind of generalized, so it didn't matter if you try to track something in YouTube or Vimeo or whatever your player is, the standard types of interactions you have with the video would be the same. There's some more mature ones in terms of the SCORM and CMI5 profiles for courseware tracking. There's also xAPI profiles out there around ebook interactions, PDF annotations, and so forth. I believe there's also some newer ones that were just recently published in the past few months around an audio profile, which is another derivative of the video profile, very similar, and also the flashcard profile. We expect more of those to come and grow in future months too with this profile server project. In terms of history, actually the idea of a profile ultimately came from the HTML4 specification. It was released back in 1999, 20 years ago. It introduced the idea of a metadata profile. Unfortunately, the HTML4 spec didn't really define what that should look like. There was no real world use cases for metadata profile. This was way before the days of web APIs, and there was no guidance as to what the metadata profile should look like. HTML5, however, today does better support this type of metadata and is now widely used on the web and the semantic web, especially in search engines by Google, Bing, and Yahoo. They are all using something called JSON LD, and that stands for JSON Linked Data. So with xAPI profiles, we are actually creating metadata profiles using JSON linked data. This is what I was referring to earlier when I was talking about machine readability. JSON linked data comes from the RDF tradition, and RDF is a semantic web standard and kind of a philosophy that was created by the W3C. W3C stands for the World Wide Web Consortium. They created all the standards you use today when you get on the web. This presentation isn't about isn't going to go deep into RDF or trying to understand JSON LD. All you need to know is that we're using JSON LD as a simple profile language. We're not going to get into all the syntax. Okay. Continuing with our analogy about human readable versus machine readable, here's a few examples of human readable versions of profiles. It's a CMI5, SCORM, and video. These are all human readable website documentation on the web that can provide further context and requirements for implementing the profile beyond what can be understood in the machine readable JSON LD version. So concepts in xAPI profiles represent things like the verbs, the activity types, the extensions, and the attachment types in an xAPI statement. There are several required and optional ones, as you'll see on the table in the far right column. You can see which ones in the profile spec are optional versus required. And they allow you to find some basic metadata about a concept. You can define what scheme it's in. That property means which profile it's in. You have pref label, which allows you to provide a simple title. You have the definition property that allows you to provide a description. And then you have some other ones that are more advanced properties for establishing semantic relationships between different concepts. Getting into extensions, the concept of an extension, there's actually several different types. Extensions are basically custom properties that are used in profiles for extending xAPI beyond its core data model. So again, in the far right column, you can see some of the required properties and then some of the optional ones here for different types of extensions. You have activities extensions, context extensions, and result extensions. And then the optional properties for extensions allow you to provide more advanced options as to whether a concept has been, for example, deprecated, if there are recommended activity types or recommended verbs. And it also allows you to provide a JSON schema for constraining the extension to a specific type, which is a real powerful feature of xAPI profiles in the profile spec. Let's get into templates and patterns in profiles. Oops. Let me go back one here. Yep. Okay. Another really cool aspect of profiles are templates and patterns. These were requested by the community during the development of the profile spec a few years ago. The idea of a statement template naturally comes from the early days of xAPI when Rustici Software and the Tin Can Registry introduced the idea of recipes. Statement templates basically are recipes, but they now have the more formal requirements of JSON LD wrapped around it in the profile spec. Concepts, templates and patterns have several optional properties, but unlike concepts, they only have one required property, and that is the location property there you can see on the screen. But in a nutshell, templates are used to define structure and the rules of xAPI statements for a specific profile. And the patterns are used to define the sequence or order of the statement in those templates. And I'll get into an example here. Let me go to the next screen. So these are some of the resources we had put together when building the video profile. As you can see, there's a certain sequence of statements here that a video interaction or a video session will usually occur. You'll initialize a video, you'll play it. The user will probably optionally seek to a specific time in it. They may pause it, they may complete it, they may terminate it. These are the sequence of events that can occur using the video profile. So if you looked at the JSON LD, I'm not going to pull that up, but it would show you those exact constraints put on the profile, like you have an optional initialized and a terminated at the end, and you have all these optional statements in between. And that's what patterns let you do, is determine the sequence. There's some basic templates and manual processes in place to create and publish profiles. These are provided more detail at xapi.vocab.pub/resources. These are some ones today that let you kind of like define your use case, reuse existing ones, and then publish it. However, these are all going to be improved over the next year, and Aaron will talk about that here in a few minutes. For the time being, there's some existing high-level steps and resources in place, though, that you can leverage from ADL. There's a vocabulary server that lets you reuse and browse existing concepts. And it's also the site you want to go to even if you don't necessarily need to reuse all of an existing profile, but you just want to use some specific verbs for your xAPI implementation or some activity types or extensions. You can reuse any of the IRIs or for existing concepts out there. Just click the browse button and you'll see them listed in alphabetical order. The current vocab server is going to be upgraded with more capabilities to support profiles in the future. For example, right now it doesn't allow you to see statement templates or to validate your content against existing templates, which are some of the most important things, promising things you can do with the profile now with the xAPI profile spec. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron here to talk about the future xAPI profile server work. There you go, Aaron.
Okay. All right, everybody can see my desktop and can you see PowerPoint?
Yep.
All right.
Yes, sure
Swap displays though. The button in the top left corner, it says swap. There you go.
There we go.
Yep.
All right. Let's talk about a little bit of reality. xAPI profiles for sure, but xAPI by itself, it has to be straightforward and scalable. It's been tough to work with, right? There's a number of use cases that we're trying to consider in terms of how people need to be able to use a tool that doesn't even exist yet, right? For a job that we're still trying to figure out how to do. So as an authoring tool provider, you want to be able to provide users with potentially with the ability to create templated interactions that conform to interactions defined within an appropriate profile, right? You might want to have all the xAPI interaction and tracking pre-baked so that you're just filling in templates with content, and then you're helping to normalize the learning experience at a level of all of our learning is going to come in this format, and so we can do things like that. As a designer of learning experiences, you might want to be able to easily incorporate established best practices into designs for your learning experiences. Rather than all of us pretending that this one course that we're making or this one job aid that we're creating is the first time that anybody has ever done this thing, all right, we might want to be able to take patterns that have been codified by professional organizations and stakeholders that can inform, job roles and procedures and policy, and build that stuff in so that it's just auto-filled in for you, so that there's less variability in the delivery of a learning experience, of a particular type of learning experience. As an analyst, you might want to generate reports that are based on established patterns for xAPI. And if you have poor quality data and it's not aligned, or it's just like kind of all over the, it's coming from different tools and sources, and that data doesn't all line up, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to actually do good analysis of what's going on, unless there are established patterns and there are reliable data that can be caught, right, to establish, to catch that there's a pattern. And there's a number of other use cases on here too. The point is that profiles can organize some or all of these attributes. We're talking about verbs, activity types, attachments, extensions. Jason just went through all of that with you, all right? What the profile specification does by itself specifically is formalize the format for a profile, all right? Put it in JSON LD. You've seen, and we know that in reality right now, these profiles are described in a spreadsheet or a document. And that's largely because we don't have really good tools to produce some or all of the process that is needed to kind of create this, craft and generate a JSON LD document that will help us with automating validation and accelerate the semantic interoperability of our learning experiences, right? And then further, even just granted the fact that we currently have, web-based or document-based of some sort profiles, finding those profiles is tough, so the search and discovery of these things is fragmented. ADL has done a great job of consolidating known profiles, one could consider them verified profiles or validated profiles, to one GitHub repository. But you still have to know that they're there, and you still have to kind of know what you're looking for in there, all right? And there is dubious, right? There, it can be anything, okay? So we need to take a look at this from a bigger picture, a little bit wider stance. For xAPI profiles to really help us scale xAPI capability, we need to think holistically about the challenge of governing what will be a dynamic and ever-expanding reference for semantic interoperability. We need to be able to govern this information centrally to help us with publication and maintenance. We needed to be able to help with curation, to help with persistence, lookup services, resiliency. If we want access to information to data that is timely, that is relevant, that we can count on and rely on to help us make decisions, all right, we need some help. And so among the use cases that we have informed this effort and the requirements that we gathered back in 2017 and 2018, there's one workflow that particularly resonates with me from the standpoint of, I'm trying to build content. I'm trying to teach somebody something. I'm trying to build content that trains someone online. And if I want to do a really good job with xAPI, and I want to track interactions to competencies, I want to, evaluate, multiple different sources and start coming up with like some way to correlate what's happening in the learning environment to what's happening in a performance environment, in the job environment, all right? What would make my life easier, and honestly, anybody who's an instructional designer who's ever had to build e-learning and trying to do stuff with xAPI, what would be really easy for us is if you could just open your development environment or authoring tool, and you're offered a list of profiles to choose from. So right away, you choose the application context that you're designing or creating something for, all right? It could be, we could carve that up in a number of ways, but let's just pick one and go with it. Once selected, that appropriate data capture then becomes easily set. We're baking stuff into the interface. We're baking stuff into the interactions that you're going to start developing with. We want to make it easy to create meaningful learning experiences and force less people to have to figure out how to code stuff with xAPI. And when we can do that, then with data flowing into a learning record store, we can generate visualizations that are informed by data that conforms to a profile, so we know that we are looking for the right data, and we are getting, we're getting the full picture of what we expect to be capturing from the learning experience is indeed exactly what we're capturing and can make sense of. Right? It's not enough just to capture the data. You have to be able to act on it, and that's what we're trying to do, right? So ADL is writing an xAPI profile server. This is going to be a new tool, clearly, because it doesn't exist yet, right? And it's going to dramatically improve the quality of learning analytics using xAPI, and it's going to do that at scale, right? What does that mean? Well, all right. What we're trying to do is promote the consistent creation, management, and access to xAPI profiles. And we're trying to do that so that we can strengthen xAPI's capability with regard to its data to relate localized community of practice with global best practices. I think there was a question there was a question that was asked, I think, earlier online about is the GitHub repository for ADL, is that the full and complete list of the xAPI profiles that are in existence? Well, probably not. We know Ubiquitous as an organization has created several profiles. Some of the, there are other organizations. Elsevier is generating xAPI profiles. There's a number of organizations that are starting to do stuff with xAPI profiles, but are we aware of what everybody's doing? No, we're not. That's one of the things we're trying to do by helping to come up with either a centralized or done a networked approach to exchanging this information about who has what profiles and what information is available, but making that information at the concept level shareable and reusable so that we're not just creating stuff from scratch and then further fragmenting our data structures from organization to organization. What we want to be able to do is, if the video profile is a perfect example. Is there any use case that isn't addressed by that profile for video in terms of what you want to track and what you need to do and what you want to capture? If there is, working with the video profile group is an easy way to get more stuff into their profile. Otherwise, there's no reason to be reinventing how to do video and how to talk about video and how to track video. They've got it fixed for you, all right? But much like how that video profile kind of came out of the community's desire for it, all right? We know, based on what we've seen with xAPI and the applications and the innovations that have happened in and around xAPI over the last 6 or 7 years, all right? We know that the cool ideas that have become the norms later always start out at the fringes, and we need to make sure that we have ways of identifying the cool things that are happening out in the fringe, and and by fringe I mean highly localized, highly contextualized applications, all right? And being able to promote that stuff up as we discover it through usage, through analytics, in the profile server, and make that stuff available to everybody so that best practices can continue to be promoted, and we are more and more promoting semantic interoperability, because it's not just a one and done thing. This is something that we're going to have to actively grow and maintain as a community, okay? But so when we talk about the profile server that's being developed by ADL, I want you to think about it in terms of 3 functional applications. There's a publish capability in which we're trying to enable you to publish and maintain your xAPI profiles. There's a serve capability in which we want to make those profiles and their contents available with appropriate permissions via an API. And we want to be able to validate or confirm that a given xAPI profile conforms to a shared set of requirements. Okay. So that's kind of where that's at. Now, there's a timetable in which this is all happening. The work on this actually started in mid-August of this year, right? So by September, really October of next year, we expect that the team will iteratively release to ADL at least profile publishing, profile serving, profile validation. Eventually, those will all be part of one piece of software. And we're going to talk about namespace governance. We're going to need, starting in January, we're going to start, I think, reaching out to the community, and so we can start talking about how we want to approach the ability to edit and version and have some command over profiles within given namespaces. And by that, we mean that, you know, if the Navy's creating a set of profiles for performance support, okay, or even let's say self-paced e-learning. The Army may want to make use of that profile, and that would be great, okay. But the Army may also want to do other things to that profile too. Now they can create a derivative profile or a companion, or a profile that builds atop of or adds new concepts to the things that the Navy, for example, may have already done. But what we probably don't want is for Army to go in and edit and revise directly Navy's profile. So how we divvy up throughout what will eventually be a network system, who gets to touch what based on maybe their namespaces to help kind of control access to or entitlements to specific profiles. Those are things that we need to talk through in terms of understanding what people might need, and then figuring out then how we should go about doing that. And that's not necessarily going to be a technical solution. A lot of it is likely to be a practice solution, but we should all get on the same page and document what that practice would need to be then. That's all I'm going to talk to. Thank you all very much. I'm going to turn it back over to Jason. And
you could keep your slides up if you want there, Aaron, and I'll just.
All right, fine. I'll just keep my slides up. You do it.
Okay, next slide. Yeah, thanks, Aaron. So that's hopefully giving everyone some ideas about the future. The current resources are here. I believe there was a question in the chat about that author profiles repository. Yeah, that is a list of all of the known JSON LD profiles out there. As Aaron mentioned, there are some other ones out in the wild, I think with JISC and others that have published recipes and things like that. They haven't updated them to the profile spec yet. But ADL's attempt was to kind of centralize everything because there were so many dispersed profiles out in the wild. That repository is just for the RDF representations of the profiles based on the requirements of the profile spec. So it has the structure, the metadata, the properties all around what's proposed in the profile spec. The vocab server was a first effort and kind of a last minute effort to, I think when I was still at ADL, to try to get all of those profiles in the repository that were published as RDF somewhat visible in a vocab server. So you could at least use the vocabulary concepts and the extensions and activity types. As I mentioned earlier, there is no way to really see the templates and reuse the templates or do any kind of publishing or serving, as Aaron mentioned, or any kind of validation. So all of that we recognize is much needed, and that's where the next iteration is going. But there are some good resources out there if you just kind of want to get familiar with the spec and see what's available. But I think this profile server is going to go a long way in making all this much more usable, and as Aaron said, really bring more scale to xAPI in general. And let's see, last slide. Yep, just to recap. So that's what profiles are, and if you did not know, they're a blueprint for success. As I mentioned, it helps you document your domain-specific concepts when you're implementing xAPI and create the statement, templates, and structure so you can have really good interoperable analytics. And that's it. And I think next slide is my contact information. And that should close it out. Let's turn it back over to Liz for some questions from the audience.
Okay, all right. So one of the questions is, I'm the author of a commercial LMS with xAPI authoring capabilities. Will this tool allow validation of profiles our company creates against xAPI standards without disclosing the IP to the world? Or is it correct to say that this is entirely a flavor of open source? And if so, what licensing is used?
That's a good question. That's a solid question. In terms of, you know what, I don't know that I have a definitive answer at this time in terms of what licensing is going to be used. I mean, I can tell you that from a profile server perspective, I think it's our collective, and, you know, thoughts that it should be released Apache 2. But in terms of the actual profiles themselves, that is a discussion that's probably worthy of bringing up through the namespace governance, because I think that, you know, it's going to be access and entitlement of the ability to both not just edit and but even just use these profiles. Jason, you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a question I've heard asked before, and it's, you know, at the core, will this tool allow validation of profiles our company creates against xAPI standards and otherwise, can you validate a profile you create against this using this tool without disclosing the intellectual property to the world? Now, I'm not really sure where intellectual property would come into play, but if you're doing something, you're creating some kind of activity tracking that is maybe involving some intellectual property or some kind of proprietary information, and you don't really want that to get out to the world, then you probably wouldn't publish this profile to the profile server, right? That would be, you would create what's called, I think Aaron, as you have coined this term before, an application profile. So the profiles published on the profile server are intended to be consumed and reused by the community at large.
Okay, all right, that in on that question. Next one is, does xAPI have a profile that ties to IMS's comprehensive learner record standard?
I have not seen any profiles that are tied to IMS learner record standards. There was a xAPI profile for open badges, and it was the early version of open badges. I believe there's a more modern JSON-LD version of open badges that has been published and is now part of the IMS. But I don't think that old xAPI profile of open badges was ever updated. I think it's all part of the IMS group now. But I think that's a different question that was asked about comprehensive learning record standards.
While writing a profile, is there a way to implement a way which will allow a particular template rule to apply when only a particular set of statements are encountered? There's also an example. They said, suppose I want only a particular set of rules to be applied when a video play statement is encountered, and another set when a pause is encountered. I don't want all rules to be applied to all statements. So is there any if else like clause that could be used?
Yeah, I don't think that's yeah, that's not really the way profiles work. So you have statement templates that allow you to decide what is the verb, what that would be used in a statement, what properties are used in, kind of the structure of a statement. Then you have patterns which can determine like which sequence of the statements should get issued. But I don't believe there's another ability to add additional conditional based rules based on existing statement templates, if that's the question. Is that how you interpreted it, Aaron?
Yeah, that's the way I interpreted it, and I don't think at least in what's out there as a spec, that's something that we even support. But I would be very curious about the use cases involved in this, whether it's hypothetical or real, and understand what's really trying to be done, or what's trying to be accomplished, but what's the intent behind that, what you're trying to accomplish. And then two, understand if there's a way we could do it already, And then 3, if there's not a way to do it already and there is a real need to do it, then let's figure out how we do that in a way that scales. So I like the challenge. I just don't know enough about it to understand what A, is that a real challenge, and B, is that something we need to really, is that something we know how to deal with? So
yeah. Now there might be some conditional logic that would be written into the profile server to validate statements against a profile. But yeah, there is no like conditional if else logic that you can put in the profile itself.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question is, does it have a profile to support paced e-learning in real time? Self-paced, sorry, support self-paced e-learning in real time.
I'm gonna just put a little pin in that real quick. It's not real time. It might be close to real time, but it's not real time. So let's just put that out there. And then secondly, is there a profile for self-paced e-learning? I would say specific for self-paced e-learning, not yet. That's all I'm going to say about that.
All right. The next one is, what is the difference between LRS and a profile server?
Well, one's like a bank, and one's like the money counter, I guess. The LRS is used for storage and retrieval of xAPI statements. You know, the actual storing and moving the data around itself. The xAPI profile server ensures that data, to the degree that it can be automated, is valid and conforms to known constraints or preferences, if you will, however you want to think about it, in terms of what that data should look like. So with the specific purposes of the end uses that the profile is enabling, in terms of what kinds of things is it trying to report on, what kinds of decisions, whether they're automated or human, or they are trying to be impacted, and how and what about what's going to be generated out of the data is going to inform specific types of next actions. And so that's the difference right there.
All right. My next question is, if we use the URL from the xAPI vocabulary repository, and if you change the application, will they still be valid?
Yes.
Good news about that, we could always make a new assertion that if you see this identifier, it's going to be just like this other identifier. Jason, would you back me up on that?
That's right. That's right. But it also, there are practices in place that will probably still be followed, in that we're using persistent IRI. So there are identifiers. The URL of the xAPI.vocab.pub, that server, that could get changed, but all of the IRIs that are posted there, those should be persistent. Unless we come out with a whole new version of xAPI that, puts those all back into the core spec or something, and I'm not going to go there. But right. Yeah, those should all still be good. Now the base domain of xAPI.vocab.pub, that could change. It'll probably be something more pertinent to a profile server. But all of those IRIs that are posted there should still be good, usable.
Okay, thank you. Is it fair to say the high-level goal of the profile is to normal all LRS?
Yeah. Yes, it's to promote interoperability between LRSs, right? So this goes along the lines of the question Aaron just answered a few back about what's the difference between an LRS and a profile server. The high-level goal of profiles is to help promote the interoperability of the content being reported to the LRSs. So people aren't trying to store the way they interacted with the video 10 different ways. And if they tried to send it to a different LRS, they have to make different sense of it, or it's semantically represented differently. Yeah, that is the high-level goal, I would say. Right, Aaron? Yep. Any comments?
Yeah. No, I think you said. I think we've talked about that a bit, and I think you've said all you need to say on that.
All right. This This viewer says, I looked at the profiles on the GitHub. What are some other profiles / types of profiles you or others envision being created and shared next?
That's a good question. I think Aaron mentioned one earlier. Performance support one would be good. I did see a draft flashcard profile recently published a few weeks ago. I think that'd be relevant. I'm not going to try to be too clairvoyant here, but I think there is a need to have a assessment profile maybe, and a simulation profile, and there's different types of simulations out there, so there could be multiple types of simulation profiles. Aaron, you have any other ideas if you looked into the future hourglass?
Well, I mean, I'm just waiting for Rusty Software to come out with a ping pong profile. But other than that, that was a little inside joke there. Other than that, I think you mentioned the big ones. Like, I think things that people want immediately, the things that would help people immediately are things that I think help people accomplish specific types of let's say, publishing, for lack of a better word. So whether that is self-paced e-learning, or it is, or performance support, or simulations, or live virtual training. We might want to have a profile to describe live virtual distributed experiences. Whatever types of common use cases would be for wanting to track, pretty much, and have, a standard set of information and learning analytics that come from these things. Those are probably the areas that we need to focus on and prioritize first, especially for stakeholders that can actually drive those things with real use cases and real requirements, so that we can start to understand not just the fact that they want to track these specific interactions and say, I want to track everything, but also to say, here's what I want, but more importantly, here's what I want to understand about how this person, this team, this cohort, this division, this unit is training. How are they training? How is it translating into their performance? What about their performance indicates things, opportunities for remediation? Those are the types of things that we want. Those are the types of conversations we want to have, as I think anyone who's building out profiles, is not just a conversation about what all the things you want to track, but more importantly, what is it you want to know? Because then it opens the door to lots of different ways and interesting solutions to identifying what it is, to defining what it is that you want to be informed about.
All right.
I may have rambled there. Hopefully that made sense.
Now it makes sense. You're good. The next question is, does blockchain have a place in the xAPI world?
This is one of those questions that I'm seeing a lot of, and there's no, I don't have a solid answer for that. Is there a place for blockchain in the xAPI? I'm sure there is. What is it? I don't know. When there are solid use cases to apply that to, then the conversation can be really interesting. But right now, I don't know what we gain with blockchain that we don't already have. In terms of real world to date use. So.
All right. How about, have any of the rapid development tools expressed any interest / support / notice / vague awareness of this effort yet?
Depends on what you mean by rapid development tools. Who's rapid?
I think maybe they mean content authoring tools in general.
Right. So I would say that there are definitely some vendors who have expressed a lot of interest and demonstrated interest in wanting to not just find out more about profiles, but participate in testing them out and beta testing out how our APIs, so that they can incorporate profiles, and a profile server into their product, so they can help govern dynamically what it is that they're going to track based on the application context that people want to develop in. But I'm going to, since I can call out names, I'm going to call out names. I haven't heard from Articulate or Adobe ever about xAPI profiles, and we've been doing this stuff for 2 or 3 years, and it's not for lack of reaching out to them. So if anybody knows anybody at Articulate or Captivate and they'd like to get involved, we would love to have them involved. But
Yep.
otherwise, it's fine with me. They don't want to do it. They're the one, they're the ones who are not going to. If they don't want to adopt xAPI profiles, there's going to be a lot of work coming up in the next 5 or 6 years that those tools won't be part of. So.
Yep, and the person who asked the question did clarify the Captivate and Storylines of the world, so you're right. Yep. Okay, next question is, how specific to experiences do you expect profiles to be? For example, do you think there should be a profile for on-the-job task or profiles for types of tasks performed?
Yeah, so the question is, like, how granular do you want to go? And that's that's a good question. I think you could, depending on what types of interactions merit some type of analytics around a specific profile or requirement for you to report on them, then you could definitely create a profile for that. Now, that might be a little too granular just for having one task represented as a profile, but there really is no rule on the granularity. Actually, I think the profile spec's pretty flexible in that you could do something very granular or you could do something very big.
Next question. At the moment, if I do not find a needed verb/activity from application point, I create my own. Profile server will bring more tools to validate against specs, make them more shareable, etc., right?
Right.
All right.
Yep, that's the intent, and that's really what linked data provides, and why the profile spec is based on that, because you can publish and share in a kind of machine readable format and make things more searchable and more reusable inherently.
All right. You guys might have to help me with this one. I've never seen this before, but one of our viewers said, is there a profile for S1000D? Did I say that?
You said that right.
Okay.
And as of this moment, there is no, not that, to my knowledge, there is not a profile for S1000D. Can there be one? Absolutely.
All right. Another one says, you mentioned API. Will this profile server have a profile API for vendors to use?
I believe it will.
Okay. I think, unless I missed any, I think that's all the questions, unless, oh wait, there's another one that just came in. Hold on, we still have 9 minutes. Okay. Oh, this one's a long one, sorry. Here we go, ready? The times table slide had the DoD using xAPI profiles by 2020. Do we know of current service-wide efforts within the DoD community to ensure standardization and holistic data aggregation and usability across branches and organizations?
Yes.
There's also a follow-up. Do we know? Do we know if those 2020 DoD xAPI profiles are going to be service-wide or only used few and far between with hopes of future integration?
If you were asking me to ballpark it, I would say 2020 is going to be specific, specific examples of adoption that probably expand greatly starting in 2021.
Yeah, and I believe Andy Johnson there at ADL is trying to lead a DoD xAPI profiles working group to follow on some of the stuff that's being created. So
Andy Johnson? That guy owes me $20.
Okay, all right. Well, I think maybe that's it for the questions right now, unless any more roll in. The speakers will have access to these questions if you're still asking or if you're still typing your question up. So we'll share those with the speakers at the end so they can reach out to you if we don't get to you. But I'd like to thank you guys so much for sharing your work. And in case anybody on here listening doesn't know, we're going to have a follow-up session to this webinar on January 15th. And if you'd like to register for it, I'm going to drop a link in the chat window to the registration.
Register for that. Please do register for that, because we will start talking about namespace governance probably, I would believe, starting with that webinar. So tune in January for more fun, exciting action.
All right, and the registration link is there in the window, and we'll also be sharing that via email too. So with everybody who is registered, in case they want to follow up. And do the speakers have any final words before we go? Words of wisdom?
I think we look forward to seeing some of you at ITSEC, and otherwise, if we don't get a chance to talk before the end of the year, have a great holiday season. Talk to you next year.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Liz. Thanks, ADL.
Yep, thank you. And that's it for the day. So thanks to everybody for coming, and you'll get a recording of this webinar in your email in about an hour. So if you find this useful, feel free to share it with your colleagues. So everybody have a wonderful day.